Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Kadar Woman podcast, the podcast dedicated to amplifying the often overlooked success stories of remarkable African women who are barrier breakers, status quo challengers, and change makers around the world. I'm your host, Lola Harris. So, did you know African women climbed mountains? Or that one has reached the South Pole? Well, today's guest survived two near-death experiences to become the first Black African woman to summit Mount Everest. Yes, the Mount Everest, and she's on a quest to complete the Explorer's Grand Slam, a challenge to reach the North Pole, South Pole, and all 7 summits. Only 70 people in the world have achieved this to date, and if you're like me, you're probably wondering, how is this even possible? Well, to find out how the award-winning mountaineer Saray Khumalo did this, or to learn from the necessary mind shifts she made, including dealing with imposter syndrome, and the reason why she started her nonprofit, Summits with a Purpose, which raises money for education for disadvantaged African schools, then you need to listen into our conversation. And oh, by the way, she's also a Guinness World Record holder. Let's listen. Good afternoon, Miss Sarah. How are you?
I'm fantastic. And thank you so much for having me, Lola. Looking forward to our chat this afternoon and also to get through to your listeners and sharing my story and my journey, hoping to touch somebody in one way or another, even if it's just one person.
No, I think you will. I think you have an amazing story. I am so appreciative of you making time for me and the listeners today. It's the morning over here in the States, but this is going to be a great conversation. So I'm confident we're going to dive into some great aspects of your life that's going to inspire the next person. And so just to get started, I would love for you to just tell me more about your heritage, where you're from, and what you're doing.
Yeah, fantastic. So my name is Saray Khumalo. That's my married name. I was born in Zambia, which is in Central Africa. I grew up in the DRC. I was raised by my grandparents. I am one of 7 girls raised by a single mother. And my grandparents came from Rwanda in the 50s, and they were missionaries. My mother was an immigrant in Zambia, a go-getter. She's now like 76.
Oh, wow.
But nothing passes through her. She's a saleswoman through and through. She strongly believes in women. I remember a time when the neighborhood and people pitied her for only having girls, and they would say, Ellen, try again, try for a boy, because the boys will look after you. And at some point she was like, you know what, you are enough. She did so much for us. She took us all to schools on the right side of town, even though she lived in the township. She also taught us the value of saving and money and how to create wealth. She believed in property, like she built properties. And she believed in adding value to people. So what are people looking for at any time? She would import. And I mean, she was just amazing in her days. And she would carry us or take us to some of these meetings, which sometimes I'll think, why am I here? And she'll be negotiating, and I'm thinking, I want to hide myself under the table because I know you've got the money, just pay. But so that was my mother. My grandparents, on the other hand, had an amazing social conscience. My grandmother, who lived until she was 101, was vegetarian. She used to have these fields that she would make us go and weed and cultivate. She would plant maize, groundnuts, sweet potatoes. And whenever we would harvest, she would keep some for us and share with some people in church that needed it. She would get on a bicycle. I think she's the only old woman that I knew that used to have a bicycle. And she would go and deliver. And one of the things that I learned from them, my grandmother and my grandfather, is that if you don't live a life of service, that is a life wasted. As a young kid, you don't really understand that, but it's something that I appreciate so much, and it's done so much. It's given my life a lot of value and helped me to find my reason for being. And it's really very African. It's about Ubuntu, about realizing that I am because you are.
I love that. So there's been inspiration from your mother from day one, and then your grandparents on an additional layer, which I'm sure it's been a part of your journey. And so let's just jump into how you, um, just transition from the corporate office to Mount Everest. I think for people who don't know you, I think this is going to be a fascinating story to listen to. And that's part of the reason why I want to talk to you. It wasn't just because um, obviously you're an African woman. That's part of what the podcast is about. But you're an African woman who's summited Mount Everest and then some. And so would love to understand that journey of
Yeah.
how you made that climb.
Yeah. So it's a long one. I hope you have the whole day, but
We're
but we'll cut
listening.
it short. So I like I said, I was raised by a single mother, my grandparents, and I came to South Africa, got married here. I have two boys of my own, and I was working in the corporate world, and I was successful. What is seen as success? I had a home, I had a family, I had a car, and I was a manager at work. Then something happened in 2009. I got a call that my older sister had passed away unexpectedly. I remember I was sitting in the office around 7 in the evening, which tells you how much of a workaholic I can be. And I just started crying on my own, thinking I'm alone in the office, and realized there was somebody else because I just didn't understand. And I started wondering whether she had achieved her purpose. And I started reflecting on my own life that day and a few days thereafter, wondering whether she had achieved her purpose, wondering whether I am living my purpose.
Mm.
I went back to my grandfather's words to say, if you don't live a life of service, that is a life wasted. And I looked at my life and I thought, I don't think winning arguments in the boardroom is actually being of service. I don't believe that's a legacy that I want to leave. And I reflected on my mother telling my sisters and I that the sky is the limit. I didn't think I was doing that either. I wasn't reaching for the skies. I wasn't living a life of service. And I actually, about 4 to 5 months later, quit my job, lost a lot of shares
So
because
cold turkey.
this was a financial institution listed on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. It probably was an emotional decision at the time, but it damn felt good. It was like, this is what I'm supposed to do. And I went to work at the post office. And the reason I joined them, there was this group of people that were going to make products to help people that previously were not involved in the economy understand finances, understand wealth, and how to manage. And I thought, wow, I want to be that, because those people are generally Black people. They look like me. So I want to be able to add value to that. And I joined, and unfortunately, it didn't work out. I was there for about 11 months, did some good work, and joined another company that was starting a bank. And I was employee number 2. In this environment, something happened. They encouraged employees to adopt charities or NGO causes. And we adopted a home that is in Johannesburg that looks after street kids. At the time, they used to have between 180 and 200 street kids. And this is the time when there was stuff happening in Zimbabwe. People were crossing borders. So there were kids on the street, and they were picking up these kids and helping them. And every month, as a company and a team, we would take these kids for a hike to a restaurant. We would really help them when they are in matric, which is the last year of high school, to come and learn interview etiquette, to just help them, because after 18, the government stopped supporting them. And every month I would go around, and the other people in the committee would go around the office asking for money, contribute something. And the next month, people see you coming, they know it's the 20th. She's coming to ask for money. And people started pretending they're busy. That's just donor fatigue, which you would probably relate to.
Mm-hmm.
And in that process, somebody in the team said, I'm going to climb Kilimanjaro, which is something that had been on my bucket list for a few years. So I said, no, I want to come with. So we all were going to pay for ourselves. And I said to her, what if we actually use this journey to raise money for Kids Heaven, which is the home that we were looking after? And they all agreed, and we did exactly that. So we raised enough money to build the home, an outdoor gym, because the kids needed a playground. And we converted a room into a library and a study area for the kids, because they
Wow.
used to study at the dining table. My summit of Kilimanjaro wasn't necessarily easy, and it happened on Uhuru Peak in Tanzania, but something shifted when we were handing over this library and the outdoor gym. One of the kids in the home said to me, do you really come from the township? And I just initially thought it was a joke. Do Black people swim? Until I realized that she was serious. She said, no, because people like us don't do things like this.
So what is the township?
So a township is, so South Africa is coming from an apartheid era where there was segregation, where Black people were put in certain areas and white people in certain areas, coloreds in the other areas. So the Black people were in the townships. And the white people in the suburbs. So the townships is not necessarily where you find money. It's a lot more high density. Yeah, so that's a township. It's probably the ghetto. I think some people would call it that.
Got it.
So I looked at her when I realized that she was serious. She actually said, the exchange students that come from Europe are the ones that do these kind of things, when they go. I didn't reflect on it there. I was taken aback because I realized she was serious. But then I looked back at my life and remembered when we used to have 1 hour of Cartoon Network. I used to go and watch Wonder Woman and Superman and thinking, wow, they're epic, they're heroes, but they don't look like me. They don't speak like me. They're flying around. Nobody around me flies. And I had a sense of self-disbelief that this child had, and it was real for her. And I wondered whether I was doing enough as a grown-up that now understands that I too have a capability of being a superhero to show my sons that help comes from within before they looked elsewhere. And that's where my journey to climb mountains started. And I started the initiative that you see at the back, Summits with a Purpose, that I'm going to climb mountains, the highest peak on every continent on earth, the 7 continents, but to use it to raise money for education. Because I believe education is the equalizer. And it's the one thing that's allowed me to do a lot of what I've been able to do because of that investment in my life. And I'm hoping that, my contribution in a small way, even if it allows one child, to sit at the table, to ensure that we as Africans or the next generation are not second-class citizens in the global village, that it has become real, especially with COVID. My child is no longer competing with the child next door. They're competing with the child across where you are. How am I making sure that they're getting the fair chance to compete at that level? And I've since raised over 2.6 million rands. I've built over 10 libraries. Initially, I started with physical libraries as a Mandela Libraries ambassador. Now I'm working with iSchool Africa. We're building digital libraries.
Oh, wow.
And my crazy dream now is to build at least one library in every country on the continent. And I know that it's possible because I know that I'm not going to be able to do it on my own. I'm trying to collaborate with other people because as a generation, what are we going to say is the gift that we left for others? So that's how I got into climbing. And it's been, it hasn't been an easy road. Let me just say it that way. I started after Kilimanjaro, I started with training. I went to train in France, the French Alps. I started rock climbing, which is strange because I didn't grow up knowing there's even Everest, never mind Kilimanjaro, right? And in 2014, I found myself at the foot of Everest, at Everest Base Camp.
So pause though. Let's pause. So before Mount Kili, did you do any training? You just decided to climb?
No. I did. Absolutely. Okay. I started hiking a lot more. So if I step a little bit back, I grew up in the church. I did say my grandfather was a missionary. So he was a pastor for the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and they have a club which is a bit like the Scouts, but they're called Pathfinders. So I was a Pathfinder. I used to go camping, but you then grow up, you get married, and you stop doing those things. And, I suppose TV and Cartoon Networks takes over everybody's lives. So I suppose my reflection and trying to search for meaning, I went back and I became a Pathfinder director because I'm a master guide. And when I went to climb Kili, I realized, you know what, I can actually impact beyond just the kids that I'm guiding at church. And I started hiking. I started hiking as part of my training. I mentioned that I went to the French Alps just to technical training, climb on ice, which I come from South Africa. We have ice every now and again, but it's a warm environment. Yeah. And so I did climb very well Kili, but I did all the wrong things that from what I know today. I went in the rainy season. That was December. It was raining. I didn't want to get wet. I bought lots of things that were not necessary. And I ran up because I wanted to just get it over and done with in the beginning. And then I was hit by altitude sickness on the summit day, almost didn't summit. So lots of learnings about when to know what pace to take, not to compete with the next person. Keep your pace. Mm-hmm. Patient when you need to be. And if I reflect on that and where we are today, a lot of people are complaining, why all these restrictions? Why lockdowns? Why wear the mask? It's short-term pleasures, but what's the long-term gain? What is it that you need to do? If you need to walk slowly so that you can achieve the summit, do exactly that. If you need to wait a little bit so that the weather window opens up and it's the right time to go, do exactly that, So I was training, hiking, I was gymming, actually 6 times a week, and I went to Everest thinking I'm ready, but I wasn't ready for what happened in 2014.
What happened in 2014?
Yeah. So I got there in 2014, the least experienced of the lot. And you know what they do, the climbers, they check you out because when you're up there, you are roped up to the same rope as them. You could save their lives or they could save yours because you need to be, part of the team. They start chatting to you over coffee. So where have you climbed? They're checking you out. And I'm thinking, I did Kili and I trained in the French Alps. And you can just see like, really? That's all you've done? And immediately my imposter syndrome just kicked in. I just felt that I didn't belong. Because I had gone there with actually the first Black man to summit Everest, I was with him.
What's
I decided that every time they made me feel uncomfortable, I'd say, hey, do you know Sibusiso? He's the first Black man to summit Everest. As if by association, he made me more competent than I was. That was a strategy. It made sense at the time and I used it.
Did it work a little bit?
I don't think so. I still don't trust me.
It didn't give you any clout with those people.
No, well, then they wanted to chat to him, and it moved the focus away from me and my inexperience. That it did.
Wow.
But anyway, so we land in Lukla, which is the most dangerous airport in the world. We start going up, and I come up with a strategy that I'm going to show them that I belong. So I started walking as fast as they did. I just it was to prove to them that I belonged there, which was to cover my own insecurities. And suddenly I moved away from my game plan, which I went with, and I started running other people's races. If you think about it,
right.
I got to Everest Base Camp in time with everybody else. Actually, I was ahead of some of them. And I got so excited. I had done it. And I over-celebrated, actually, if I remember correctly, because when I got there, I just slept and woke up for tea, lunch, went back and slept. And I stopped doing things that helped me get there. Things like drinking about 4 to 5 liters of water, keeping, it's active rest. like walking around and making sure that I'm still fit and stuff. And on the third day, I remember the camp manager said, let's go for an acclimatization hike. So you climb high and you sleep low. And we're going to a mountain next to Everest Base Camp called Pumuri. And we're going to climb to the high camp. It's just 200 meters above sea level from Everest Base Camp. And I crashed completely. Terrible altitude sickness because I had stopped doing stuff that worked. And when I recount this for my team, I always tell them that, sometimes we over celebrate. If my journey was going to be up to base camp and back, that strategy would have worked because I did very well. I kept up and but I was going beyond base camp. And I stopped doing things that worked for me to get me there. And I became complacent. And it almost cost me the journey to the top of the world if that was going to happen. But having said that, on the 18th of April, a big Sirac fell in the Kumbu icefall and it killed 16 Sherpas in 2014. And I was in my tent at the time. And I remember waking up and thinking, oh, that was loud because it shook the whole base camp.
Oh, wow.
I went back to sleep thinking, oh, wow, we've been told that we're strategically positioned, so we are protected. Little did I know, the next thing, the Sherpas were talking on their walkie-talkies, running around, and they needed a paramedic. And the only paramedic that was close to us was an American girl called Melissa. They were like, Melissa, we need a paramedic. People are injured. Everyone heard that because that was in English. Everybody got out of their tents. What's happening to try and investigate? And we're told, no, it's nothing. Then I went, had my tea, got my camera and sat and watched this nothing, and I realized they were actually picking up bodies from Kumbu Icefall and dropping them at Everest Base Camp. So I went with my camera with the videos that I'd taken and the pictures, and I said to the base camp manager, this can't be nothing because these look like lifeless bodies that they're picking up. And he just said, yeah, people have died. At the time, they didn't know how many because initially it was 1, 2, 3, until it was 16, but they only recovered 13 bodies. That event, if there was ever a time that I could have given up, maybe it was then, I had read about people dying on Everest. I had watched documentaries. I had read the books. I mean, you can see books behind me. There's quite a few of them about climbing, but you don't think it will happen to me. You don't plan with thinking I am going to actually, be part of this. And I remember walking in and asking the guys that were experienced. Obviously, they had all the answers about climbing. Now, what do we do? And I realized that, like me, they were just as afraid of what had just happened. It was unexpected. It took everybody by surprise. And it was very clear that everybody needed to make their own individual decision, whether they needed to continue or not. And somebody that was a lot more experienced, I think he had been climbing for 15 years, just picked up his bag and ran off base camp. And it made me wonder what I needed to do. And somebody sent me a message to say, figure out what you need to learn from the experience, and that will help you decide how to move forward.
Wow.
Because there was also a bit of survivor's guilt. The Sherpas that had just lost their lives, were they there because I decided to come and climb? If I didn't come, would they have been there? Why them and not me? Like it's all sorts that goes through your mind in that moment. But one thing that I appreciated realizing then, and even now I appreciate, is that we all are going to die, right? The point is, by the time that our time comes, how much of an impact would we have made? What would our journey have been like? What would have been its purpose? And I appreciated that it was their time and not mine. And the same way that accidents happen on the highway and people lose their lives, and I still drive, I'm going to do this, but a lot more intentional. I'm going to do this a lot more careful. and make sure that by the time my time comes, I've fulfilled my purpose, whatever that is. So I
So
came back home to a
so
lot
so
of
so you did not climb that day, or you didn't
no.
summit that day?
No, we didn't. The mountain was actually closed, and everybody was asked to go home.
Okay.
Everyone.
Okay.
And the permits actually were valid for 5 years thereafter. It was
Okay.
quite a big national disaster. The Sherpas rioted after that because they needed certain things fixed in terms of their insurance and so forth. So no one summited.
That was
Um,
2014.
that was
You
2014.
are basically near-death experience. You
Yeah,
have your own imposter syndrome. You go through these different cycles of mindset. You are dealing with people who are experienced, you're experiencing that. You are realizing that you're off track in your game plan.
yeah.
But obviously, you still summited at some point. So how did you go from
Absolutely.
2014 to the moment when you summited? Can you talk through
Yeah.
going back to Everest?
Yes, with pleasure. So I came back home to people saying, "Oh man, you tried. This thing is not for us," and stuff. But one thing that I realized, and which I started doing actually from that year, and it's helped me a lot, is to put down all the wins within that challenge.
Mm.
I realized that I wasn't as fit as everybody else. I was less experienced. So I had 2 pages of all the positives that I learned from this experience. And I had half a page of what didn't work out. We lost people that we shouldn't, that was sad. And we also didn't summit as planned. And I decided that I'm going to focus on the 2 pages to make myself better so that I can go and actually do more. And I also was able to raise enough funds during this expedition that resulted in no summit to feed over 60,000 children
Oh, wow.
that would otherwise not have benefited. So there was a lot more positives. And I just, I think I know that growing up, I was raised in an environment where I prayed and I was grateful. It says, ask God for this and don't forget to thank Him. That was something that was said over and over. It just became real. A life
Mm.
of gratitude was born for me from then.
Wow.
Gratitude in everything that works out, but gratitude in also those things that don't work out, because you learn and you're a better person at the end of any experience and any encounter. Because every moment is a learning or a teaching moment. You just need to choose and see it for what it is.
I love that.
Yeah. So I went back in 2015, and I was a lot more experienced. I had gone to Russia, climbed Mount Everest, which is the highest mountain in Europe. I climbed Mira Peak, Labouche East, which is other mountains in Nepal. So I went back as a little bit more experienced, no imposter syndrome. I knew what I was doing, and I got there in 2015. And while climbing from Camp 1 to Camp 2, as part of a rotation, we leave everything at Camp 1, touch Camp 2 by 2 o'clock, come back to Camp 1, and sleep there. And there's 9 of us, we're all walking. 3 guys are fast, they're going. Nawang, that's my Sherpa, he says to me, Sarah, if you keep waiting for these guys, you're not going to make it, let's go. So him and I branch off. So the 2 of us are walking on the Western Kum on a glacier, crossing crevasses and so forth, but we're just going, everything is going well. And we can see Camp 2 at a distance. And suddenly the glacier beneath us starts shaking us like leaves in
Oh,
the middle
wow.
of nowhere. So he's shocked. I'm shocked. Like, I don't understand what's happening. I mean, I don't come from an earthquake prone area. So nothing like earthquake. I didn't think about that. And then one turns around and he puts his carabiner onto my harness so that we are hooked. We are attached to each other. And he says to me, Sarah, we are jumping. And my job was to just look at his feet. And by the way, Nawang had 22 years experience in this year of being on Everest, guiding people and so forth. And I looked at his feet for what seemed like 5 minutes, but apparently it was about 2 minutes. And it stopped. And he takes off the carabiner. Now we're still trying to figure out what is it. So we're looking around, and where we were at, we were surrounded by mountains, Lhotse, Everest, and Numtse on the other side. So that earthquake shook the mountains so much they all started avalanching towards us.
Oh no.
Now, an avalanche makes noise. It's like rumbling. Initially, it's like far, then it comes close, and then now you can see it. And you become helpless. Like, I can't outrun this. And this is the year after the 16 Sherpas lost their lives. And Nawang, he just looked scared. I mean, the initial one, when the earthquake was happening, he was like, let's jump. And I was like, jumping, we've got this. My job is he now started praying. So before you go through the Kumbu Ice Fall, they do a puja ceremony. And they taught us this prayer, Umani Peme so I knew it was their prayer, And he just started going, Umani Peme and I'm thinking, goodness, this God of yours that I learned about 2 days ago, he ain't saving me. I just went, no, Jesus God, because that's what I know, And I make a joke of it, but it was serious. It was scary, but it also a testament of leadership. When he showed leadership and said something as crazy as let's jump a crevasse that opens beneath us, it was going to kill us. But I believed him. I was walking with him there. But when he looked scared and he was praying to what I don't understand, I didn't know what the game plan, maybe he's saying, save me and not this one, I decided to go my own route. And in reality, if he was saying, let's go left, I was going right. And it begs the question, what kind of leaders are we today with the world that's shaking around us? Not at work, at home, in your home, in your community, in everything that you're doing. Do you trust in who is guiding you, in where you're going, and how firm are you for the people around you? Never mind leading yourself, but leading the children that you've been blessed with, and leading the community in everything that they do. So it's my Everest journey has got so many nuggets. It's I know I'm a better person because of all these experiences. To cut the story short, mountain was closed. Again. Sent back home. Yes, sent back home. It's like this mountain was like, go back. So I came back home, and that was 2015. 2015, December, I went to South America. I climbed Mount Aconcagua. I came home, and during all this time, one thing that I didn't mention is I was writing letters to say, please sponsor me. And people were saying no. Like, no.
Even though you'd climbed these other mountains.
Oh, yeah. I was even told that no one like you has done it. Who's the man that's taking you?
Was this by the South Africans? Like, who was telling you this?
So some of it companies, some of it individuals, So in 2016, after the earthquake in 2015, I couldn't afford to go. So I decided, okay, I'll save up. I think that's the other thing that's important is Everest is not a cheap exercise. But at the same time, if it's that important to you or for you, you need to make certain sacrifices. And I made a plan. I stopped going on holidays. I was saving up most of my bonus, where it was going. So in 2016, as I was saving up, I had also changed a few things. I noticed that people that are cyclists and runners were having a better time in the mountain than I was. So I became a cyclist. I started running.
Wow.
And in 2016, I was doing a stage race. So we cycled this mountain biking for 60 kilometers on the first day. On the second day, I think it was the 34th kilometer, I was coming down the mountain. And what I didn't realize is I had lost my back brakes. And as I tried to brake, the bike just threw me off. I was really going at between 42 to 45 kilometers an hour. And I just hit onto a rock at the bottom of that mountain, cracked my head. I was airlifted. I was unconscious. I ended up in a coma for almost 3 weeks.
Oh, wow.
And that was almost the end. Honestly, it was survival. Didn't think about climbing at the time. I remember waking up in Mill Park Hospital and just trying to figure out where I am. I was just really confused. I pulled out the pipes from from my mouth. I hate my vocal cord. This is not my original voice. It was just crazy. And my family came from all over the world to come and say goodbye. My kids were told, not to come and see me. They must remember me the way I was. And it was just crazy. I mean,
Wow.
you climb all these mountains and you come home on a bike and this happens. And the nurses they thought it was a motorbike. They were like, this can't be a motorbike. This is like hectic injury, right? And after that, I survived. I obviously woke up. And it's end of November and end of August, I beg your pardon, because this happened on the 8th of August. It was the day before Women's Day in South Africa.
Mm.
I remember that very well. and I started walking. The doctors just said, you know what, don't get back on the bike, because if you have another concussion so close, hey, we might not be able to put Humpty Dumpty together again, So I made sure I stayed away from the bike. I started walking. In September. October, I started running. I had a Soweto marathon entry. So I said to you, I was cycling and running. And I went to Soweto Marathon in the morning. And I decided, no one was taking my ticket for the marathon. So I might as well just go, but I'll do a half marathon. And I get there and I find the people doing the full marathon singing and having fun. And I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to do the full marathon. And I ran the full marathon and I finished it.
Oh, wow.
Got a medal. I've got a picture where I'm just jumping for joy at the stadium. This was a Sunday. And on the Monday, I was in the doctor's office. I'm like, hey, dude, I ran 42 kilometers. Surely I can still climb.
So now you got the confidence to go back to climbing.
Yes. And it's, to be honest, it was the first time I even entertained going back to Everest, So I went back in 2017, and 2017, I went all the way up to the South Summit. And for the first time, I was able to see there is the summit, but the weather was bad. It was just bad. I initially thought it was bad because it's the first time I've been in that environment over Camp 4 in the death zone. But it was just bad for everyone because my Sherpa was struggling to walk as much as I was. So I said to him, maybe let's go back down because I had additional oxygen and then we can come back when the winds are better. So he's like, okay, let's do that. We start going down, but something is wrong with my oxygen supply. And I'm looking at the meter, seems to be working, but something was blocked, which we both didn't realize. But I kept saying to him, why am I feeling weak? I was just feeling really weak. The next thing, I couldn't talk. I just fell off, but I'm still roped up. And I fainted in the dead zone. And this is where, so the dead zone is between Camp 4 and the summit. And he wasn't doing too well either.
Oh,
and he
wow.
couldn't help me. So he left me there. And went to Camp 4. And now this is what they tell me. And when he got to Camp 4, he asked other people to come and help me. And they came and lifted me. When we got to Camp 4, that wind was so bad that it had blown off our tent. So sleeping bag, like everything that we left in there had gone. So he picks up just a makeshift tent and leaves me there, but he changes my oxygen tank. And the next day, they come, 4 Sherpas with a stretcher to come and pick me up. And I felt somebody touching me and I opened my eyes and I called him. I said, oh, Lakpa. And he says, oh, you are alive. And I'm thinking, oh, of course I'm alive, but I'm hungry. And he says, no, he doesn't have food, but he has water. So he gives me water. And I think that was really the lowest point in my journey because at Camp 4, you can literally see the summit.
Wow.
So close and yet so far. And I remember wondering for the first time if all those people that said I couldn't I didn't belong, whether they were right. Was I just being stubborn and pushing? And I just said that was it. And I think with everybody, and even those that are listening, they would attest to the fact that when you start wondering whether the naysayers are right, that is a problem. I refused to get on the stretcher. I said I walk back. I walked down with them, go to Camp 2, was airlifted. And I think inside I had really, I had given up, even though I hadn't said anything. I came back home to people saying, "Oh, sorry." Don't say it in your face. "Oh, shame. So what happened?" Da, 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 da. And in 2018, I remember sitting in my lounge, my son, younger son, he was 15 then. He came to me and said, "Mom, when are you going back to Everest?" Like it's nothing. Like, not are you going back, but when are you going back? I probably looked bored, I must admit. I don't know what I was doing. And then I looked at him and I said, "Well, 2020, and that was like giving myself another year." And 2019, when I started this journey, by the way, I did not know that no Black African woman had summited Everest. When I Googled, it seemed like they had, but the person had climbed, not summited. So then this guy...
So there's a difference.
There's a difference,
okay.
Yes. So this guy said, "No, you are going to be the one." And he started, hiking with me and climbing with me. And every time would get to the top would go number one, because he believed so strongly that I was going to be the first Black African woman.
So can we pause for a second? Was he an South African, a fellow South
Yes,
African?
South African.
So you met him at home?
Yes, I met him at work, actually.
Work, okay.
It's actually, so the work where I used to work, where we used to support Kids Heaven, the first time I did Kilimanjaro, that's where I met him.
Okay.
This dude just booked time in my diary, came to sit in my office and was like, "My name is Lwazi Ngwenya," like big smile. And I'm like, "Okay." And then he says, "Oh, you did well with Kilimanjaro. I think you should come to Everest with me." I'm like, "No, I'm going to do Everest after I do Aconcagua," the whole plan. He said, "No, did you know that no Black African woman has done this? And you don't really need to do them in any order. You can train for them." And we're going. And that's how I met him. And we became my brother. So in 2019, on a Sunday, 3 weeks before Everest expedition had started, I got a call that he had died.
Wow.
It just brought back all those attempts, the fact that he believed in me, the fact that I didn't have any reason not to go into 2019, other than that I didn't have enough money yet, and that I don't have control over tomorrow. I have today, and I have to do something today. And coincidentally, the Friday before I got the call on the Sunday, a company called Vimo called me and said, they want to get involved in what I'm doing, but they don't have too much money. They want to contribute about $18,000 to this thing that I'm doing. So in 2020, that is, which was the plan. And so I called them on the Monday and I said, "Would you still be willing to sponsor me if I went this year?" And they said yes. So I cleaned up my bank account, used my credit card, which I normally do. And 3 weeks later, I was on Everest. And I had been talking to Noah Hanna, who's a guide on Everest. He had summited at the time. He had summited 8 times. And I said to him, and he was like, "You must come with me." And I said, "No, I don't have enough money. Now these people are going to give me some of it, and it's enough for me to pay for the expedition." So there I was in Kathmandu. 3 weeks later, I joined him and 2 other climbers, and there was 4 of us. There is a lot when I reflect that I did differently based on the learnings from 2014, 2015, and 2017. And I call it failing forward. I think there is no experience. No one should tell me or you what is a failure and what is success.
Wow.
It's only when we fail to learn from the experience, when we fail to use it as a stepping stone to the next level, that is a failure. Otherwise, we will be gloomy all the time with so much failure, because we can always do better, you know. And so I did a lot differently. I went in a smaller group. When they said the weather window is good, I asked why, you know, what's the plan? It was just, you know, it was amazing what I was able to do, but more humbling that it was God's time.
Mm.
I believe so strongly in that.
Mm.
You know, and I also did something differently. I wasn't anxious about the summit. I worried about getting to Camp 1, worried about getting to Camp 2, and celebrated exactly that. And you know, and on the 16th of May 2019, I got to the top of the world, you know, and what a humbling
Wow.
moment. I remember thinking about Loazi, thinking about my mother who always used to say the sky is the limit, and how wrong she was, because suddenly I was standing up there and the clouds were beneath me.
Mm.
I think we say the sky is the limit because that's what we can see, but we need to encourage every African child that there is more. They can, let's go for the galaxy, and
Right.
maybe we can just land above the clouds. You know, and also thinking about all those which I saw as doors being closed in my face, how they were just really windows because the gate was left open for me to walk right in. And that was humbling. It was for me, it was for Loazi, it was for my tribe, but not when I got back home to see how much it had impacted other people. You know, how much people that I thought were not cheering me were actually watching and they were rooting for me. That was just really humbling and scary as well, because suddenly you realize how much responsibility you have, because suddenly you have a voice.
Mm.
You know, suddenly you can use it responsibly or irresponsibly. Yeah, it's been a blessing. Let me just say that.
No, that's amazing. And so when you summited, what flags did you plant? Because isn't that part of the tradition to plant
Yeah.
flags? Just
It's not necessarily a tradition, but yeah, people do it. Some people don't. So I always go with three flags. A South African flag. I am a South African. I go with the Zambian flag. I was born in Zambia, and my mother is still there. I also take the Rwandan flag because that's my heritage for my grandparents. I also took Loazi's picture. Loazi Ngwenya is that friend of mine that lost his life before I left, just to pay homage.
mm,
Yeah.
wow. So I mean, this has been incredible. It's just the journey to get to where you are. And I know you had to just listen to you, you had to overcome a lot of challenges mentally, the naysayers on the ground who probably don't
Mm.
have a clue what you're mentally going through. And then, of course, it sounds like you had the support of your family and your sons. I love the fact that you had your sons who pretty much propelled you back onto the mountain in a shorter
Yeah.
time frame. And the irony of it is, if you'd waited to 2020, you wouldn't have summited
No,
with COVID.
no,
So,
no.
to your point, I love what you said about why can't I just do it today? Why am I waiting for tomorrow? Because that is
Yeah.
true. Tomorrow's not guaranteed. So, how many summits have you done to date? Because you were doing the mountains in between.
Yes, so I'm doing what is called the Explorer Grand Slam. And to date, I think from the last time I checked, there are only 70 people in the world that have done that. And that is summiting the 7 highest peaks on the 7 continents, the North Pole, skiing to the North Pole, the last degree, and then skiing to the South Pole. So I've done 4. I've done Kilimanjaro, I've done Everest, I've done Aconcagua, and I've done Elbrus, and I've skied to the South Pole. So that's 5 points. I still need to do Mount Denali, Mount Vincent, which I'm doing in December, and Carsten's Pyramid and Denali. Did I say? Yeah, Vincent, Carsten's Pyramid, Denali, and the North Pole. The North Pole.
So, you're
The
doing
North
some in
Pole.
December.
Yeah, so I'm doing Mount Vincent in December, and I'm doing the North Pole in April.
Wow, that's amazing. So, I mean, before we switch gears, just one, I'm just curious, is the hardest, is it safe to say the hardest summit was Everest? Because of how many times you had to go back?
Um, yes and no. I think I've got love-hate relationship with Everest because of all the attempts and how much I had to put in, you know. I think she has been my best teacher, and
Mm,
I am grateful for that. I believe that if I had rocked up there and summited once, I wouldn't be the leader that I am. I wouldn't be as grateful and gracious as I am. That mountain humbled me, you know. It also showed me how unworthy at times we can be, and how much gratitude we need to give to, beyond ourselves, and that there is what we can control, but there is also acknowledgement of what we can't control.
mm.
And for me, it's God. Other people, it can be whatever it is for them. Having said that, when I went to the South Pole, which is not a mountain, is skiing, the last degree, in winds and cold, no rocks to hide yourself on. And when you get to where you are tired, you pitch your tent yourself. You get in. That was another level. And I was saying to a friend, it was not Everest, it was never rest. Like you ski for 1 hour, you stop for 10 minutes. At the 11th minute, you're up. You need to be going. In that 10 minutes, I learned to take out the jacket, put it on, feed myself, take the jacket off, put it back in, back on my skis, and I'm going.
Wow.
Like, yeah, that was another level. I think that's the hardest thing I've ever done
That
in
is,
terms of adventure.
I mean, I'm hearing is just a woman of resilience because there's a mindset that is at play here. You just have to keep powering through that. So I'm gonna switch gears a little bit because I know you do more than just climbing. Like you said, you're climbing. One of the things that are near and dear to your heart is summits with a purpose. And so I wanted you to talk a little bit about that and what the next steps there.
Summit with a Purpose is an initiative that I started, and I said I will not just climb, but I'll climb with a purpose. I'll climb and change my world one step at a time and leave a gift of education to the next generation. And I use it, I approach companies and I say, come and be part of the history that I'm making, but in exchange, donate a library, contribute something, help me make a difference in a child's life. And that's how we've been able to build more than 10 libraries, and we keep going. And I believe that is also a way that we can build at least one library in every country on the continent, because we can. It's possible. I like Mandela's quote, which says, "It always seems impossible until
Until it's
it's done."
done. I love
Yeah.
quotes too. That's one of my favorites. So there's also something you said that I want you to say in your own words about your philosophy about being ordinary.
Yes. 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 I like when I started climbing, I had on my website to say, I'm just an ordinary African woman trying to reach extraordinary heights. What Everest and my journey has taught me is I am not ordinary. I am uniquely extraordinary, and being ordinary is a choice.
Mm,
I think we are all uniquely extraordinary, and sometimes we choose to be ordinary, which is sad. So I'm hoping that if you're listening to me, you remember that you were made for this time. God doesn't make mistakes. You are extraordinary. Live it, be authentic, and change the world and make history. Because if someone like me can, imagine what more you can do, and imagine how much more as a collective we can do as we continue to leave the world better than we found it.
I love that. Thank you. And I think also it's probably worth saying that you also have a podcast as well. And we
Yes.
can get into how people can find that in a second. But last before we change gears again, um, what was the best advice you were ever given in this whole journey, especially when you started climbing?
Well, I think the best advice, I'll go back to before climbing, as my mother saying, "You are enough."
Mm,
You know, I think a stubbornness is probably something that I inherited, believing in her capability and her hard work, and anything that she puts her mind to, she would go in and get it done. And if I go back to climbing, I think it's trusting in me and trusting in who I believe in and who protects me is the best advice that keeps me going even today. And my favorite verse, if I may add that, is Jeremiah 29, verse 11. It says, "For I know the plans that I have for you,
mm.
says the Lord, and it's plans to prosper you." So even when the world is shaking around me or around you, remember that it's plans to prosper you. You may not understand it, but He does. And He knows that it's to prosper you. And if you trust that, which I do, sometimes with difficulties, sometimes grudgingly, but I remind myself that is to prosper me. I'll figure it out. And I obsess about finding the positives that show me that prosperity that is a promise from God.
Wow.
Sound like a preacher. I'm not a
I was just
preacher.
about to say, I feel like I went to church because that was spot on. And if anyone could speak to the world is shaking around you, literally, you can. And just remembering that verse is probably empowering even in that moment. And like I said earlier, it's just there's a mindset that's at play. So now we're going to kind of switch gears into the lightning round. I'm just going to ask you a series of questions, and there's no wrong answer. Just say what comes to your heart. So what is the last thing that you learned? And it could be anything.
Last thing that I learned,
Yeah.
oh, that my son is, yeah, yeah, my son is a softie. He's stubborn, but he's a softie. I don't know if that makes sense. Yeah.
What is your greatest fear?
Oh, failing my children.
Hmm.
I think my greatest fear is them not seeing how much how much power they have within them, and not having learned from my journey how much more they can do. I think that's my greatest fear. But I pray that they do in my lifetime when I'm alive.
Amen. Amen. And what would you consider your greatest achievement?
My children, you know, um, yeah, they are my
That
greatest.
that is amazing. You climb Mount Everest and four of the summits for your children. I love that. I love that. What matters? Oh, sorry. Go
Actually
ahead.
interesting because my son wrote me a song when I came back, and he says, "People may think you're an overnight success," in this song of his, but they don't know how resilient and how much work you put behind it. And it just made me see that I didn't have to tell him that. He can see that I've put in work. That summit was not a fluke. That summit was not given to me on a silver platter. It's something that I had to commit to, I had to sacrifice for. And I pray that he sees that as something that is either a blueprint or something that he can learn from to be a better man and a better citizen.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that's the prayer as a parent that you model the life that you want them to have. And hopefully it's better than what you had, right? So I can resonate with that as a mom of two boys as well.
Yeah.
Um, but back to you. Curious to know what matters the most to you.
Oh, wow. Living a life of service, and hoping that when Jesus comes, I'll be ready.
Amen.
That
Yeah.
matters.
And what is your motto? What words do you live by?
Oh, authenticity. I do me, and you can only pretend for so long, you know. Yeah. I think it goes back to me saying, I'm uniquely extraordinary. If I try and pretend to be somebody else, then I'm being ordinary. So staying true to me is important.
Love that. What are your thoughts on destiny? Because that's what Kadara means.
Destiny. I know. I worry when we say that we are predestined, because then we can be complacent and think that it will just happen. I think understanding who we are and our purpose can help us get to the destiny, that the purpose that God made us for. So yeah, that's really my thought. I don't believe in people that say it doesn't matter what I do, I'm destined. I think that brings in complacency, and we'll lose the opportunity to actually optimally live a purposeful life.
Yeah, I love it. 3 words that you would use to describe you, the Kadara woman. 3 words.
Describing me, I am loyal, I'm resilient, and I'm faithful.
Well, I just want to say thank you so much for your time today. This has been an amazing conversation. I felt like I was on the journey with you, even though I wasn't in spirit. And of course, I know I'm going to be rooting for you in December, because we want you to be one of the number 71 people who've done is it not the Grand Slam? That's tennis.
Explorer Grand Slam.
Oh, okay, there is a Grand Slam in there. Okay, yeah. So definitely rooting for you. But just thank you so much. I really, really appreciate your time today. And I hope everyone who listens to this is inspired to summit their own Everest, whatever that means in their life. So thank you.
No, thank you for having me, and thank you for telling our stories. It's exciting to see that we telling our own stories, and pray that it has the impact that we need it to have for the next generation.
Amen to that. Well, have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to my conversation with Saray Khumalo. I hope you're inspired by her reflections on purpose and her story, which serves as a reminder to the extraordinary potential within each of us, and a call to action to pursue our dreams and make a positive impact on the world. At the time of this episode release, Sarah is on yet another fundraising climb to Mount Kilimanjaro, this time to raise $20,000 for an African education program. One more favor. Please be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts so that you don't miss an episode. You can also follow us on social media at Kadara Woman. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave me a rating so that we, yes, all of us, can continue to collectively amplify these untold remarkable African stories. Thanks for listening. Until the next episode, stay inspired as you live your radically destined life. This podcast was created, produced, and recorded by Lola Harris and sound edited by Mo Isu. The Kadara Woman podcast is a production of Kadara Media.